folks, to Part 13, the Basic Impetus How to Play series. In this episode, we're going to go into detail regarding multi-unit melees, how they occur and how we resolve them. A little bit different than one-on-one units, melees. And we're also going to go into victory conditions, how you win the game. Basically the objective of a normal one-off game. Okay, I hope you enjoy, and let's get right into it. Let's take a look at multi-unit melees and what they look like on the table and how we resolve the melee. Here we've got 2 units of heavy foot, and they are just charged by these heavy cavalry, which make contact right there. They're all in contact, and therefore this is a multi-unit melee. You've got 3 units in this case. The first thing we have to do when it comes time to resolve the melee, which would be immediately since this unit just moved into contact, the first thing we have to do is find the 2 main units. Now, by definition, a main unit is the unit that occupies more of an enemy unit's front with its own front. So if we look at these 2 heavy foot units, which one is the main unit? Well, I could see right away that this unit of heavy foot occupies more of the heavy cavalry's front with his own front than this unit, as you can see. So this unit would become the main unit for the heavy foot. Now for the opponent, his main unit would be this one because there is only the 1 unit, so it's easy. This unit becomes the support unit. So what is the effect of a support unit and how does this work? Well, when it comes time to resolving the melee, which is now, these 2 main units will do all the fighting. They'll make the damage rolls, they'll make any cohesion tests, and apply any results, and permanent losses, what have you. Only these 2 units will fight. A support unit does not actually roll any dice in the combat. What he does is he calculates his VBU with impetus bonus, if he has one, as well as any tactical modifiers, depth bonus, etc. And he 1/2s that result and adds the number of dice, the result, to his damage dice roll. So in this case, let's say that he has a VBU of 4. Well, no other modifiers. He's not charging, no impetus bonus. That 4 would be halved, and the result would be added to his damage roll. So in that case, it would be 2 dice. Now, if he had a VBU of 4, with no modifiers, if I add these extra 2 dice, this heavy foot unit will roll 6 dice when it makes its damage roll. That's pretty useful. So support units really do come in handy for resolving a melee. So he helped him out. Now, again, let's keep in mind that only these 2 units, the main units, will actually be rolling dice and taking damage and applying results. What do we do for results? Well, once the permanent losses have been applied, if any, disorder, what have you, from the cohesion tests and damage rolls, let's say, for example, this unit was either routed or retreats. If either of those results occur, any support units on his side must retreat. So let's say he was routed. He's removed from the table. Well, this guy was a support unit, so he has to retreat in this case. And as normal, he'd roll his d6, and in the case of foot, he'd half that result and make a move straight back. And that would end the retreat. This guy would then pursue. Now, he's heavy cav, so he has to pursue. That could possibly bring him into contact with this heavy foot unit again, and we'd immediately resolve another round of melee, this time between this unit and this unit. Now, if it's a drawn combat, well, the units would stay in place. They'd take their disorder and permanent losses, if any. As normal, they'd stay in place and the combat would be over until another unit activates or has the opportunity to activate, in which case another round of combat would be fought. So that's how results would apply in a multi-unit melee. Now, let's say that the heavy foot units actually won. These 2 fought, he won. This unit was either routed or retreated. Let's say he retreats back to here. Now, this unit has the option of pursuing because he has an impetus bonus. He doesn't have to because he's not impetuous and he's not heavy cav, but he decides that he's going to pursue. He rolls d6, half it, and move that distance forward. Let's say he got there. Now, support units in this case will only pursue if they're impetuous foot or heavy cavalry. Otherwise, they remain in place. So in this example, being heavy foot, they can't pursue. Even though this guy won and he did pursue, he doesn't have that option because he's a support unit. So we need to keep that in mind. They will only pursue if they normally would have to by mandatory pursuit, so to speak, normally in a combat. So that would be impetuous foot and heavy cavalry. Now let's look at a second example. This time we're going to add some missile troops to the side of the cavalry. So we have 4 units involved in this melee. Now again, the first thing we do is we look at the units involved and find the 2 main units that will do all the fighting. Now let's look at the heavy foot units first. Between these 2 units, this unit on the right, once again, occupies more of an enemy unit's front with its own front than does this unit over here. This unit here only occupies that little corner area there, whereas this one occupies a big chunk of that cavalry unit and only a small portion of the missile troops. So this unit becomes the main unit for the heavy foot. Now if we look at the heavy cavalry and missile troops, we can see that the main unit again will be the heavy cavalry because they occupy with their own front more of an enemy unit's front, in this case the heavy foot. The missile troops only occupy a small part of this unit's front, and the heavy cavalry obviously a bigger area of that same unit's front. So that becomes the main unit. And once again, the melee would be resolved as normal between these 2 units, and these units being supports, i.e. adding dice as modifiers to these 2 units' damage rolls. One thing we need to take particular note of is what defines the front of a unit, and this will help us actually identify main units in a melee. And it's pretty much the same process as defining a zone of control for units. In this case we have our archers, and their front is basically an extension of their front edge and running along the sides of their base. So you create this corridor that becomes the front. For instance, this heavy foot unit, if it was positioned like this, right at the corner, you could see right away that half of this heavy foot spear unit is within the front of this spear or archer unit. So it doesn't have to be in contact. Of particular note is that units that attack the flank or the rear, they can only be counted as support units. Like in this situation here, where the archers are engaged in the front, this unit would never be considered a main unit. In this case, it would be a support unit. Another thing to take note of is that units that attack like this and are only in contact with the side edge do not occupy any of the front of this archer unit in this case. So keep those things in mind. Now let's look at a third example. This time we're going to add some additional heavy foot down here to the melee. And basically we have 3 heavy foot going up against the heavy cav and the missile troops. And once again we find our main units, as we usually do. And again they will be the units that occupy more of an enemy unit's front with their own front. And if we look at the heavy foot, we can see out of all 3 of them, this unit occupies more of an enemy unit's front with its own front than these 2. So this one becomes a main unit. Now if we look at the other side, this heavy cavalry occupies more of an enemy unit's front with its own front. So compared to him, this guy becomes the main unit. So those are our 2 main units. Now we have a unique situation here. We've got 2 units which are not in contact with a main unit. Now whenever this occurs, now remember this, whenever this does occur, this results in a split combat, a term used by the author. And basically what that is it's a separate melee resolution within this whole melee. Okay, we have to figure out the main units down here. Obviously it's going to be this one for the enemy's side here, because it's the only unit considered. But these 2 units have to be considered for the spearmen. And of these 2 units, this unit occupies more of the enemy unit's front with its front than this unit does. So this becomes the other main unit. So what we have is 1 melee with 2 separate melee resolutions. And the active player decides which one he will resolve first. And depending on his choice, that can have an effect on the remaining melee to resolve. This unit right here would function as a support unit for both these melees. Now the only rule to remember here regarding this is that a unit that is a main unit cannot function as a main or a support unit for another melee in the same combat. But this unit is the only non-melee, non-main unit. He's a support unit, so therefore he can support multiple melees, as he's doing here. So let's just run through this real quick. Say I decide to resolve this first. Okay, we fight this between these two main units. This unit supports this unit. Now let's also assume that this unit is routed, so the heavy foot are gone. That ends the melee. This unit, because this unit was routed, would be forced to retreat. Let's say he goes back that far. This unit, as heavy cavalry, would then pursue. Let's say he pursues that far, not enough to get into contact with this heavy unit that retreated, heavy foot unit. So that ends this melee. That's done. Now notice over here that the only two units in contact are these two units. This unit that used to be in a support role for this combat no longer is. He retreated. So this situation changed. So we now resolve this melee, and the support won't be there for this heavy foot unit. So it'll be a little bit different. So you can see right away that the melee you resolve first can have an effect on the remaining melees within the combat. So that's an example of a split melee within a combat. Now let's take a look at something the author calls passive activation, for lack of a better term. Let's say, for example, this is a brand new turn, and I won initiative for the turn. I decide I'm going to start off my turn by activating this heavy foot unit. I'm going to move into contact with those enemy missile troops, a charge. I make contact, and we all fight a melee. So all these units end up fighting a melee. And let's say it's a drawn combat. Maybe there's some disorder here, maybe some disorder there, whatever. It's a drawn combat. Units remain where they are. Now, but when a unit takes part in a melee, like all these units did, either as a main unit or a support unit, it is considered to be activated, what we call passive activation. So all I did for the turn was move him into contact. All these units fought a round of melee, and by doing so, they are considered to have activated. So I can't go to this next unit here and activate him, and then we fight all over again because he's in contact. That won't happen. He's considered to be passively activated. The same applies to him. Now, let's say I finish my turn. One round of combat was fought, and there's what it looks like. My turn's over. Now it goes to the opponent's part of the turn. Now he can still activate these units, either one of them. But as soon as he chooses one to activate, and they all fight in another round of combat, let's say, for example, he activates this heavy cav. All right, we fight a melee all over again because this is just one big melee, really. And let's say this unit was routed, whatever. There's some more disorder, what have you. Okay, so this unit is done. Now, this unit becomes passively activated and can't be activated again for the turn because he fought in this combat. Okay, so that's what's called passive activation. Now we're going to talk a little bit about winning the game, victory conditions. How do you do it? Well, basically, the first thing we need to do is understand how it works. Every unit in the game has a demoralization value. It's a VD, basically. And it's a stat found on your army lists. For instance, if we look at the feudal English here, my heavy cavalry, the top one, each unit has a VD of 3. And if I look at the next unit here, it's missile troops. They each have 1 VD. And the heavy foot also has a 1, and the skirmisher has a 1 VD. Now, as each of these units is routed from the table, these VDs accumulate. And eventually, once they reach a certain point, your army is considered to have routed from the field, and basically you lose. What are those values? Well, at the very top of your army list, you'll see what's called a VDT. Now that stands for your total demoralization value. It's an army statistic. And basically it's followed by 2 numbers split by a slash. In my case it's 13/7. Now what the first number is, 13, is the total of all the VDs of my army without options. Now the slash, the next number after the slash, is actually 1/2 of that value rounded up, so 7 in this case. Now the second number is really what we want to pay attention to. When our routed unit's VD accumulates to a value of 7 or more, my army is considered to have routed. Basically, I lose the game. So if we look at an example here, my heavy cavalry are each worth 3. If I lost 2 of them, my total VD loss would be 6. If I then lost a missile troop unit who has a VD of 1, it would be 7. At that point, I would have reached the halfway mark of my total army demoralization value, which is 13, and I would have reached 7, and I would have routed. At that point, the game would end. Now, these totals kick into effect and are calculated at the end of the current turn. So you still get a chance to fight and maybe break the enemy as well before the turn is over and the game ends. So keep that in mind. That is basically the objective of the game. Okay, folks, that pretty much brings part 13 of the Basic Impetus How to Play series to a conclusion. We pretty much covered all the rules for melee, multi-unit melees in particular, as well as some victory conditions, how you win the game. Future episodes will be about more specific things regarding the rules, such as the special rules for different armies, shield walls, chariots, etc. In addition, I am going to be posting a battle report, turn by turn, showing the basic impetus rules and action. I'll show all the dice rolls and interaction between the units. So that'll be a good example of the rules and action. Also, I'm going to be posting examples to part 13, which show examples of multi-unit melees and how they work, some of the more confusing elements of the game. Also planned, I will be making a set of transition videos about full impetus, basically showcasing the differences between full impetus rules and the basic impetus game, to help basic impetus players get into the full impetus rules if they so choose. And I will be catering to that as well. I hope you enjoyed the series. There's still plenty more to add. And if you have any questions regarding basic impetus or impetus in general, feel free to message me. Let me know. I'm more than willing to help out. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned, folks. There's still plenty more videos coming. Thanks a lot.